We're good? Okay. Hello, everyone. All right. I'm going to start by saying that there are several things that I did not put on the source sheet on purpose, because what I wanted to put on the source sheet were things that I normally quote outside of the source. So you have it there now to be able to see. I do think that these sources are important to hold, because as I understand it, certainly in my in the time that I've been teaching, which is over 20 years now, this issue has been raised many times, right? It's come to a question in many forms, many times. And what I wanted to do with you tonight was to look at it, again, in the way that I understand it, fundamentally in the text of the Torah itself. Because it's one thing to talk about things in terms of ideas and concepts and, and what do the Rishonim say and so on. But I really believe that this question, this fundamental question of, are we meant to integrate or isolate, right? Are we meant to engage and embrace the world, or are we meant to hold our own behind our walls and, dabble in the world as necessary? Is a fundamental question about the nature of our people. And so it is fitting that it should at least be presented in some capacity within the core text of our people, right, which is the Torah. So as it is with all things in the Torah is not a philosophical work, right? The Torah doesn't go on and say, here, let me talk to you about existential realities. It tells you stories. And in the stories, you are to learn the manner of interaction, personality, behavior, response. One thing that, for example, is very important to recognize about the personalities in Torah is that they don't often misunderstand what's going on in the story. Right? You don't have a bunch of baffling, bumbling individuals, right? They very often understand quite keenly what's going on in life, and they respond accordingly. There are certain situations in which there are differences of opinion as to how certain things should be responded to. And those are golden moments, because in those differences of opinion, we're able to recognize different approaches to a uniform or a real objective situation that's happening. So all of that is very, very important, but it's the way the Torah teaches. So it presents things in narrative. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at the narrative that I believe is a source for understanding, or the foundational aspects of understanding this question. Now, it's also true that the further back we go in the story, in other words, the further back that we go in the book, the more difficult it will be to unpack. Because if I go back to Adam and Eve, everything's in Adam and Eve, right? I mean, everything's in the creation. So it's harder to tease out the details in creation. But as the story goes along and the story gets on, and you have more unique individuals, and you have more unique characters, and you have more nuanced situations, you have a better way of being able to differentiate and to parse the things that we're reading and experiencing and understanding. So what I want to do is, rather than look at the Moreh Nebuchim, which we will, the Rambam's in here, don't worry, the Rambam's here, but so is the Ramban Nachmani. I want to look at the story, and I want to analyze the story with you. Again, it's going to be in broad strokes because I don't have a lot of time. This shiur should not be 45 minutes to an hour. This shiur should be 3 hours. We should really be able to address it properly and look and unpack the text. So whatever it is that you've read up until now in terms of the source sheets are primers, right? In other words, you've read this. What are we going to do with all of this information? So I'm going to try and tie a lot of it together for you, and to be able to present to you again a possible gloss, right, to the story that I believe applies directly to this question. Now, the key characters in the story that I'm looking at, of course, are Yosef and his brothers, which it's right in there that you learn almost everything about the nature of the Jewish people. More accurately, you learn about almost everything about the Israelite nation, right? Because the Jewish people is only one side of that. It happens to be the non-Joseph side, right? It's the other side. somehow Yehuda won out. I mean, very prominently won out. Because it's not just like Yosef is subordinate to Yehuda, Yosef is non-existent. And yet we still bless our kids to be like him, right? And the boys anyway, the girls are safe, but the boys are in peril because there's tradition to bless the boys, right? After Yaakov Avinu saying, right, Bechai Barach Kadosh Yisrael is going to bless through you too, right, which are the children of Yosef, Ephraim and Menashe, Yesimcha Elohim Ephraim Chim Menashe. Meanwhile, where is Ephraim and Menashe? They've been annihilated for hundreds of years, thousands of years. They're gone. And yet we still bless our kids to be like them, which is an anomaly. It's odd. Right? Nobody says, wait a minute, I don't want my kids to be Ephraim and Menashe. they were destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. Why should we be blessing our children to be like that? And yet, for some reason, we do hold the character of Yosef, right? The demut of Yosef to be quite prominent in our lore. He's very prominent. And as Herman Wouk points out, it is the longest biographical narrative in the Torah by far. There is no other life that is told to us as a life, right? Everybody says, what about Moshe? That's not a biographical narrative. Happens to be Moshe is running through the story with us, right? But as a biographical narrative, his story is much longer than by far, than any other person in the Torah. So that also tells you something, that Torah itself is presenting Yosef as a major character, as a centerpiece in the presentation of the entire development of our people. Because when we talk about Bnei Yisrael, we are genuinely talking about the children of Yisrael, who's Yaakov Avinu. So it's of course going to be in those stories that we learn everything about ourselves, and there is no question about it, that he is by far one of the most prominent of the kids, at least in terms of how it is the Torah presents it to us. Now, look, Yehuda certainly holds his own, and it's not like there aren't another, 11 kids, to speak of. But Yehuda is certainly the leader, and he certainly stands out as the leader. And not only does he stand out in the story as the leader, he's crowned the leader by Yaakov before he dies, and certainly by Moshe later on when he blesses the people. Yehuda certainly stands out. Not only does he stand out, Yaakov Avinu wants Yehuda to work with Yosef. And that's a beautiful pasuk, which I didn't put on here, but at the end of the whole story, basically, when they all come down to Egypt, it says that Yaakov shalach Yehuda lehorot lefanav Goshna. He sends Yehuda to go to Goshen to be able to settle and set up shop and, make sure the family's going to be okay. And essentially, who does he have to work with in order to do that? Yosef. I mean, Yosef's the one that's putting them there, basically. So that's all there. So what I've done is I've brought really just the basic pisukim, right, that we should look at in order to be able to understand. Now, I started the source sheet with the Mishneh Torah, and where Harambam is talking about Abraham. And the only reason that I did that, because normally what I would do is I would bring you the Mishneh, the thing in the Moreh Nebuchim that says when God showed Moshe Kol Tuvi, that was the entire world, and that was essentially the ways of God, and that the only way to know God is to be able to know his world. But I did that shiur already, so I'm not going to repeat that shiur. That shiur is in the unpacking our mission statement, and then I did it 400 other times across the last 25 years. So you can figure that out some way or another. But this particular thing I've also done, but not so much in this way, where I'm going to look at the development of the story with you in the psukim. So the reason why I brought in Abraham in the way that Harambam brings him is because of one thing. Abraham finds God by no teacher, by no text, by no prophecy, right? That's a very important part of our lore, right? That Abraham is not a prophet in the sense that he is speaking to God through prophecy and through the prophecy gaining his knowledge. That's not how our tradition goes, right? The founder of our people is not a man who went off into a mountain somewhere and spoke to God. God doesn't speak to Abraham in the story until, at least again, according to our tradition, Abraham figured some things out. Our tradition is that God speaks to Abraham as a response to Abraham finding God, not, like he speaks to Noah, for example. Speaks to Noah, Noah's not looking for God, not interested necessarily in hearing from God. All of a sudden, God talks to Noah and says, look, build a boat because I'm taking everybody out and you're going to have to carry on. That's not what happens with Abraham Avinu. Again, according to our tradition, Abraham spends his life searching for God. And the truth of the matter is he's not searching for God, according to how we have it. He's just searching for primary existence. Like what's the first thing? That's all Abraham really, really wants to know, because he just wants to understand the world. So why I bring this is because the way that Abraham discovers God is through the world. And so Harambam says very clearly, I don't know what line it is in your thing, but a few lines in, he says, Lo hayalo melamed. There was no teacher for Abraham. Velo modia, davar. Nobody told him anything. Nobody even gave him pointers as to, you're on the right track or not on the right track. He's using his own intellect and deduction capacity, right? Logical assessments of the nature of reality to be able to figure things out, which, if that's true, right, according to our tradition, the guy's a super genius. He's not just a very faithful and devout individual. He's really, this is a major intellect. And he's going, Lomo diadavar ela mushka. That word mushka means he's entrenched in Ur Kasdim. And what that means is that he's not just hovering above Ur Kasdim. He's not dipping into Ur Kasdim. Harambam is making the point that he was completely entrenched in the society. He was not an outsider. He was a son of Ur Kasdim, which means that all of the idol worship, the Weltanschauung, if you will, of Ur Kasdim was in Abraham's bones. So he explains to you, right? He was ben of de kochavim tipshim, right? He was amongst the idiots. He was growing up with a bunch of idiots. Of course, the entire world were idiots at the time. That's just, we say it's easier for us to call them idiots when we have enlightenment. But when you're not enlightened, you're not an idiot. You just know what you know. So it says, his parents, all of them were going to the house of worship that was Avodah Zarah. He did what they did his whole life. But when he was there and engaged in it, he was constantly questioning. So those 3-year-olds. You've met them, I'm sure, right? Who ask, why are we doing this? And why this? And why this? And you say, because X. And they say, but why? And you say, because why? And they say, but why? And you say, but, right? And at a certain point, you say, because that's the way it is. They realize that you're not answering their questions and they give it up. The difference between Abraham and the other kids is that that Abraham never gave it up. He just kept asking. Took him another 37 years, according to Harambam, right? Because Harambam over here, he brings 2 midrashim in as one, because there are two mentions in the midrash. And he codifies those midrashim, interestingly, which wasn't his task in this work, but he does it sometimes. And the reason why he does it is because he essentially is establishing it as official lore. This is the official story. There are a lot of versions of the story. This is the official story. This is what we're taking on as the general story for how we look at these things, right? And it was still trying. What's important to recognize in the way that Harambam presents it is that Abraham didn't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I found God, like some miraculous discovery. It took him 37 years to figure this stuff out. Again, according to the way that Harambam brings it. So my only reason for pointing this out is to show that the founding father of our people found God by looking at the world. And that is not insignificant. And that is not just for him. Yes, it may be in his way as he was for his circumstances just for him, but that goes without saying. None of us are living in Abraham Avinusville. What does not just go for him is that as the Hachamim say, Maaseh Avot Siman Abanim. And what that essentially means is that I am meant to look at the lives of my forefathers, right, and recognize them as paradigmatic for the nature of my life being a member of the enterprise. I don't mean the Star Trek enterprise, I mean the enterprise of Abraham, right? Abraham started a movement. And we're still part of that movement. I mean, it's taken many iterations, and there's been a lot of casualties and fallouts and, missteps and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, this is a movement. His blood courses through our veins. Remember, it's not a belief system, essentially. The belief system is overlaid on the biological breeding program. I mean, I know that that's very not PC to say because of our history and casualties and so on, but it is, you can't really get around that. It's a breeding program. So what we end up having is a forefather that we are meant to look to and find signals, right? Siman is just a signal. And it cannot be that Abraham is looking at the world and finding God, and then it become completely inappropriate and irrelevant to do so. Now, it may be that we have Torah and therefore we have some scaffolding, right? Where he had no melamed or modia davar, we have a melamed and modia davar. But you don't have to go very far in the Torah to recognize that the world is a really big part of it, right? I mean, first word, really. First few words. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. It doesn't say Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et Bet Midrash, right? Bet hashamayim et haaretz. Okay. And then, not only that, you do not hear about Shamayim again until Yaakov has a dream. Everything is v'haaretz. And all you hear about is the Aretz. Yes, it's true that you hear about the Rakia, which is all part of the Aretz, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu borrows the term Shamayim for the Rakia. That happens, right? Because he wants, when you look at the Rakia, you think Shamayim. Yeah. But there's a very big difference, of course, between sky and heavens, right? Of course there are. So we recognize that the earth is extremely central. You can't get through the first paragraph of the Torah without you being immersed in Aretz. So I don't want to go through that all over and over and over and over and over. I'm just putting it out there as just a precursor. You don't have to be, really, you need to insist not to look at it in order to be able to not recognize that. You literally go, I'm not listening. You have to do that because it's right there. Yeah. So the question is, once we actually get the enterprise off the ground, and you end up having a family, and I didn't include this in the, Rambam just keeps going there and says, you had the family then, and then, Yaakov designated Levi to be able to keep the educational system going, right? To keep the ideas that are being passed down and cultivate the ideas. But the bottom line is that you now have a family. You've got enough kids to be able to start populating something. Once you've got 12 kids, they very quickly get grandkids and great-grandkids very, very relatively easy. Especially when you've got paruvi, shritzu, vayirbu, ve'atzmu mod meod, when they're going really, procreating at fast pace. You've got critical mass. There is now an entity of people that one can speak to. So the question is, well, what do we do with this critical mass? What is the approach that is appropriate to be able to bring this enterprise into its most viable space on this earth as a people? Right? You have to think about that, right? We are people now. We may be a very small people, but think about it. At that time, you had little city-states of a bunch of club of people. It wasn't like you had these massive metropolises. Egypt was a unique entity. There wasn't a lot of them. Yeah. I mean, you think about what was Ir David. You go to Israel, find and ask somebody, right? Who knows? Where's the Ir David? Right? Ir David is like 3 blocks. It's nothing. What were these places? They weren't massive places. Nor were they a massive amount of people for our standards. Yeah. So when you realize, okay, so we got critical mass, it may still be small. Who are we in the world? And how are we meant to take the teachings of Abraham Avinu and the developments of Yitzhak and the developments of Yaakov and our own insights and developments and translate that, first of all, into a living system and to be able to be who we are on this world. What is our tactic for being, right? It's one thing to say this is the way that we see God, the way that we see life. But now that we find ourselves with these views and how it is that we're, and the frameworks through which we are looking at the world, right? God being the ultimate context for them and our understanding of that, because I did keep in there that Abraham goes out and starts talking to people about these ideas now, according to Rambam, right? Once Abraham gets the idea, interestingly, and I pointed this out many times, he does not start a religion. He starts a university. He just starts teaching. He doesn't start a religion. The reason why he doesn't start a religion is because he has absolutely no idea how to do anything for God. And he's not going to start assuming. Because then he'd be right back to step one, right, with Avodah Zarah. How the heck do you know what you're supposed to do? Everybody keeps thinking they know what they're supposed to do, and they don't. All it is projection. When I hear from God what I'm supposed to do, I'll know what to do. And that's why Harambam ends it, and I didn't put this on your pages, but he ends it very importantly saying, "U'me'avat Hashem otanu, u'mishvu'ato shenishba la'Avraham Avinu, asa Moshe Rabbeinu u'shlacho kedei lehodi'am derech avodato." Because he loved us, and because he swore to Abraham that he was going to take care of the kids, he made this Moshe Rabbeinu person and sent him to teach us how to serve. Derech avodato v'chtiram b'mitzvot. Otherwise, we have absolutely no idea how to serve. So it's very important to recognize. So the question then is, now that we have critical mass, how are we to be in this world among the other people in this world? Abraham's tactic was clearly what? Teach. Says Befirush, right? That's what I'm reading. Kiruv. It's very good. Well, I don't know if it's Kiruv, because let's not get started. That's not good. What he was simply doing was teaching. I think it's very important to recognize. I will say this. I think it's very important to recognize. It's important to consider in the Kiruv movement, and God bless them, whatever they're doing, whatever good they're doing. I'm not part of the Kiruv movement, and I don't know it from the inside, right? I only know it from looking outside. It's very important to always question how much content is in it, right? In other words, what space does the actual content and information of Torah take in the movement? And that's important. It's important just to assess. Right? So if you see that it's very high level in terms of the content and real teaching is going on in rigorous ways, well, that's so wonderful. That's like Avraham Avinu's Kiruv, right? If it's something else, then it may not match. Yeah. So Avraham is teaching, right? He has things in his mind. He has things in his what he's come to understand, and now he's telling everybody this stuff. And he's getting it all out there. Interestingly, Abraham is not so inclined to the biological program that HaKadosh Baruch Hu insists on having. He is very happy to just make it a philosophical endeavor, right? An intellectual connection, which is quite religious, by the way. Because think about anything other than Judaism, you sign up to the beliefs and you're in. Judaism, you sign up to the beliefs and that means nothing. You have to become a biological part of the people. And you have to get into a mikveh and dissolve your biological connections and somehow integrate with the people. It's got to be with the people. The belief system is not enough. As a matter of fact, you could have very minimal aspects of knowledge about the beliefs, very minimal. Your interest is in being part of the people, not in being part of the belief system. So Abraham starts this. What ends up happening is, as far as Yaakov is concerned, now he's got his family and he's starting to move around in the world, and he's not in the safe haven of his father-in-law's backyard, where he made the majority of his money, right? And his family, for that matter. He has to consider how to interact with the world. Where is the first place that he hits? In terms of interaction, Shechem. And what are we told? Vayavo Yaakov Shechem. He comes to Shechem whole. He's, for all intents and purposes, intact. He's got kids intact. He's got money intact. He's got health intact. right? I mean, what this is, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy, right? He's got the whole bottom of the period done. At least maybe 50% of the pyramid, right? If not. The question is, what about personal fulfillment? It seems that Yaakov never really got that, unfortunately, in the stories. He never really makes it to the top of the pyramid, at least in the way that the story presents it to us. He needs Yosef for that, for some reason. But whatever it is, he comes to Shechem, Shalem, Be'eretz Canaan, Vayichan et Pnei Ha'ayur. Literally what that means is he just set up camp at the border of the city. The Hachamim see that in a very interesting way. And it's very insightful as to a suggestion of Yaakov's interests. So what does it say in Gemara Shabbat Lamed Gima? It says, Vayichan et Pnei Ha'ayur, Rav and Shemuel have two different opinions, which are really interestingly very much in the same orbit. So they're definitely seeing some similar aspects, right? What do they say? What does Rav say? What does it mean, Matbe'at tiken lahem?
Currency.
Yeah,
Coin.
he sets up currency, right? He wants to set up markets and commerce with them. He wants to trade. He wants to engage in business. And it's essentially, obviously there's a different nuance with Shmuel. Shmuel is saying, Shivakim tiken lahem. He set up marketplaces, right? But essentially what it's saying is, he wants to do business with these people. He wants to not just do it in a standoffish way, because that's where also Rabbi Yohanan comes. He says, right? He also put in bathhouses into the city. He really wants to get involved in the life of the city. He wants to make the city better. He wants to interact, engage with the city. So the Vayichan et Pnei Ha'ayur, if you take the reading of Rav, Shemuel, and Rabbi Yohanan, and recognize the gloss that they're putting on it, right? How they're understanding this whole setting. The Vayichan et Pnei Ha'ayur is he's essentially merchandising the city, right? He's coming in order to be able to bring a face to the city. So now, is there anybody in retail? No? Is this only my family? My family's been in retail for a very long time. A very important part of the retail business is merchandising, right? How do you set up the merchandise? What do you put at the front of the store? How do you present it in the front and the store? When people come in, what is their experience? And that, by the way, is very much the word hen is the same word as hanut and hanuyot, right? Same idea, right? As a matter of fact, Achamim say there is a hen of the marketplace. And all of you know this, right? I don't have to tell you. You go to Mahne Yehuda, right? I don't know when's the last time anybody's been there, or you go to even Westfields. Yeah, there is a certain grace about it, right? There's a certain charm about it, right? There's a certain beauty that's in there. So that's a very, very important thing, and that's essentially what it is that Yaakov is aiming at doing with these people. He wants to be beautiful. He wants to make the city beautiful. He wants them clean and sparkly, so he makes the bathhouses, right? I'm obviously reading into that, but there's no question that this is definitely the thrust of where things are going. He wants to open an Apple store in this place, right? Okay. So he's hoping to set up shop and engage. He clearly is not interested in isolating himself in some, backwater neighborhood, so he can just kind of like take advantage of the welfare and whatever kind of services they might have, and manage with whatever kind of the rules are with that. No, he really wants to be part of this place. So it's clear that he's interested in integrating, he's not teaching them necessarily, like he's not doing what Abraham did, certainly not overtly, but he wants life to be integrated with them. Can you see that? Right? Okay. So we're going to see in the Psukim as they progress, there is a fundamental disagreement. His kids do not like this. They're of a different opinion. They do not believe that integration is a good idea. And something happens with their sister, right? She's raped. She's abducted and raped by the mayor of the city, right? By the head of the city. And they just take this as, I mean, look, nobody's ever saying that this is a nice thing. Nobody ever suggested, not even Yaakov suggested this nice thing. But Yaakov clearly wouldn't have dealt with it the way that they did. So they're very upset about this, take it as a personal affront. They think that this is a result also, right, of their dad, not being terribly cautious. And you can see that there's a major tension that occurs at the end. Because what happens? It says, Vahi Bayomer, so what do they do? What do the kids do? They have to set up some kind of, agreement to interact with people because they've got Dinah. They love Dinah. What's his name? Loves Dinah. And Shechem. Yeah. And they want to, make a deal. So Yaakov is interested in making the deal. And the kids see that he's interested in making the deal. And they think this is preposterous. This is ludicrous. How do we know that they think it's ludicrous? Well, because look at what they do. Right? Yaakov clearly believes that this is actually happening. So what they say is, look, it would be great. It would be great to get together, and I'm sure you're really happy with our sister, and it would be really nice if we were to actually interact and integrate. Right, Dad? Right. So it would be wonderful. And the only problem is that you all of you have foreskins, and we don't do foreskins. So the foreskins have to come off. And if you're ready to take foreskins out, then we can do business. So they say to them, Hirpalanu, Lisha Shirlo Orlak, Hirpalanu. Ach bezod neot lachem. Well, if you come on, if you be like us, right? Because you always convert to Judaism. We don't go the other way. Nimolachem kol zacha. You could, everybody has to circumcise. V'natanu et benotenu lachem, benotechem nekach lanu. We'll give our kids to you. You give your kids to us. V'yashavnu itechem, and we'll live with you. Right, Dad? Right. We're going to live with you. It's all going to be good. V'ayinu le'am echad, and we will be one people. Right? And Yaakov's there clearly. I mean, again, it's not saying this outright, but it doesn't need to say it outright. He's like, yeah. That's what we want. So what they do, interestingly, is this is very important to recognize. They use Berit Milah to destroy a people. People can read through this story and miss that. They just think, they used a smart tactic, right, to get them weak. No, they use the very sign of covenant that they have with God, dictated to them by Abraham Avinu. It's like the one thing that they have, one mitzvah that they have from Abraham, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Abraham, yes, do this. They use it to destroy an entire people. Right? The thing that we have that keeps us in pact with God, we're going to use to destroy you. And that's precisely what they do. Right? The third day, the worst day. They came on the city. City was essentially secure. Everybody was, in the infirmary and kind of, they did what they were supposed to. And they massacre the entire city. They kill every male, right? They kill Hamor, Shechem Beno, Lefiharev, Vayhu Dinah. They take, of course, Dinah back. Bnei Yaakov ba'u ala halalim vayabozu. Not only do they kill everyone, they also take spoils. Right, so they take what? Tzonam, Bekaram, Hamorehem, Et Asher Ba'ir, everything that was in the city. All the livestock and everything that was in the city they take. So it's not just they kill, they steal. Right? They take from what it was they take. Yeah? Et Asher Basadeh also. Right? Whatever was in the fields they take. Kol Helam, Tapam, Neshehem, right? This people miss. All the kids and the women and all the women and children. They take. So now the women and children of Shechem are now part of the populace, right, of the family. Most likely enslaved, but nonetheless part of the populace of the family. Okay? Well, again, got what they wanted in the end. They ended up becoming part of the people. In a very bad way. What does Yaakov say to all of this? One thing. Achartemoti. You made me look ugly. My ma'achurim is cloudy, foggy, dirty. You made me look dirty, ugly. Lehavisheni. I can't even show my face anymore. Right, which is very, very important because it's just shocking. It is shocking. You think like Yaakov, that's what you're worried about. You don't look good. This is not good PR. Literally, that's what he says. It's not good PR for me. I'm going to go out. Everyone's going to want to attack me now. How am I supposed to manage? I can't even show my face in public anymore. Right? Because his entire goal was in order to be able to create an interface. And you cannot have interface without beauty. Of course, the reason I said an Apple store is because it's precisely what Apple does. That's why Jobs, by the way, it was very, very important for him. This was a major thing early on in Apple. He said, we have to make the hardware for our software. It needs to be presented beautifully. The interface has to be beautiful. And I don't know if you guys remember, right? I'm looking around the room. I'm not sure anybody does, but well, some might. If you guys remember, right? When Apple was not Apple, as it is today, right? Before the Apple, so really before the iPod, right? When the iPod came around, that flipped everything, right? But I mean, I had Apple since like the Apple II GS, right? I was an Apple. We've been an Apple family for a very long time. You couldn't use anything. You couldn't use Apple with anything. Could not use it with anything. It was like you were literally isolated on an island, but it didn't matter because it was so beautiful. You preferred it, right? And when I say you, I mean me. Yeah, but otherwise, you sufficed with some ugly, clunky contraption, right? That you had to use for your computer. But the good thing was you could use it on anything and anywhere. It was very free. Microsoft wrote the software. They didn't write the hardware. They didn't create the hardware. Later on, they realized, well, maybe we should probably do some of the hardware because it's not a good idea. And the hardware never, ever measures up, of course, because they just don't get it, right? They try very hard, but it doesn't. And I don't mean to make anybody feel bad, right? But nonetheless. But look, the other side of the story is that Apple is extremely controlling, right? Because they have full control over everything, right? They want you to, okay. Actually, we're not going to, I digress. So when you realize that this is what Yaakov says, Yaakov was really, really very concerned about this. And his biggest issue with the entire thing was not like the brother they say afterwards, she was abducted like a zonah. Basically, you're saying, you're telling us this is not a good PR move? But yes, for him, it was not a good PR move. And that was much more fundamental than any of them realized. Because what essentially Yaakov was saying was, you do not realize what you've just done. You have basically dug us out of God's world. You figure out how to get us back. I don't know how we're going to get back. We need like special protection now in order to be able to walk around. In order for us to get through anything. You figure out how we're going to get back, because I can tell you right now, I don't see the way back. You have basically shut down everything that we are meant to do here. So what are you thinking to do? You're going to make a little steeple somewhere off in a little corner, and you're going to have your little teachings and whatever it is that you do. You have no connection to God's world anymore as a result of this. Yeah, unfortunately, when you are connected to the world, there are casualties. You think I'm happy that Dinah was taken and abducted? There are casualties. You need to go out into the world. You have to be part of what happens out there, and things may happen. And you have to deal with those things. You have completely shut down every possibility for us to be able to be engaged in the world. So you want to be very safe. Is that right? Yes, that's what you want to do. And what you did to those people is you used our brit in order to be able to protect yourselves. And you just killed an entire city of people because you're angry. And he never forgets this, Yaakov. By the end of his life, he literally curses them. Arur apam. He said, arur, right? He was supposed to be berachot. He said, arur apam ki'az. So Yaakov never forgets this. Yaakov is broken as a result of this. From here on in, for all intents and purposes, Yaakov retreats to the backdrops. You really never see Yaakov really front and center again from this moment on. What's the next order of business? He's got to make Yosef a nice new suit. That's his next order of business. Because there's only one kid who gets me. The only kid who gets what I'm about and what I'm trying to do here is Joe. Joe's the only kid who understands me. None of the other kids get me. They think I'm a lunatic, right? They think I don't care about things, and they've basically shut down everything, and they want to go off and they want to be, spies in this world or something. They're going to dabble in the world as they need, use what they need, and keep to themselves constantly. Joe's the only one who gets it. I mean, I know he's only 17 years old, but I see it in him. And he needs a new suit. Because he cares about what he wears, he cares about what he wears. He cares about how he looks, which is what he should care about because it's interface. The beauty is very important for him. This is why the Hachamim take it very far. I didn't put this on your pages, but they say, Yosef used to spend hours in the bathroom in the morning. He would curl his hair and he would examine how he walked, he'd make sure that he walked nicely, his moisturizer and whatever it was. He was very, very careful about all of these kinds of things. All of these things that he was careful about. Yeah? So Yaakov saw that, and instead of deterring it, he encouraged it. Yeah, what do you want to say?
Just to take it a bit high level, but from what you're saying, is Yaakov's lesson from this episode that we should be more of a missionary?
No, not saying missionary, no. All I'm saying is be who you are in the world. And in order for you to be who you are in the world, you need to be sensitive that you are not an island. You must understand you are a social animal. And in order to be a social animal appropriately, functionally, you must understand that you have interface with other people, right? First impressions are very serious, very serious. It's almost impossible to change first impressions that you have of other people, right? You really have to go through some real wiring reconstruction in order to be able to change the first impressions you have. You think it's not important, the color tie that you're wearing when you have to tell people that they're doing something wrong? Of course it is. That was a great thing I was reading in Reagan's diaries. It took me a long time to finish the Reagan diaries because Reagan unbelievably wrote daily in his journal for the 8 years of his presidency. And in one entry, he writes, he saw his son on television giving an interview. And he writes about it. So I saw Ron on TV, doing the interview or whatever. And then on the bottom, he writes, I got to talk to him about his ties. There's no question. I mean, he was definitely the best dressed president that we've had since, right? Nobody's had, obviously, if you look at it now, he was wearing 80s suits, but nonetheless, he still was by far the best dressed president that we've had since. There's no one that's even come close. And that's the thing. He understood this. Reagan understood this because he was an actor. Right, so he understood that this was extremely important. Yeah. Actually, I'm not talking about missionary. I'm talking about the fact Yaakov wasn't interested in going out and conquering the world for the Jewish cause. He was interested in being him, integrated in a world. He did not want to live in some isolated, walled neighborhood, right, where he made sure that his children never left and that he never saw anything outside, so that he could secure Avraham Avinu's teachings. He did not want that. He didn't think that that was appropriate. He knew that it wasn't right. What he wanted was to be who he was in the world, and he was very conscious that he needed to be beautiful. Because if he was going to live a life in covenant with God, and his children were going to live a life in covenant with God, and make that not a secret, he knew that he needed to be beautiful. I mean, look at how Harambam defines the nature of Kiddush Hashem. That's homework. So what happens over here is Yosef is very much this person. And his brothers see, okay, great. Now, not only is dad doing this, he's grooming Joe to be like him. And the problem is that Joe is much less balanced in this capacity than Yaakov is, right? He's got the dreams. And of course, he's not sensitive about telling these dreams to his brothers. He doesn't necessarily have that tactful acumen of maybe this is not something I tell at breakfast when everybody's there. His father shows that he's upset about it because he realizes that he needs to protect the kid, because if he encourages the kid, it's not feeding him to the dogs. So he but shamar tadavar. But he realizes this is not small stuff. This is very serious. What's very interesting, and I put this on the pages, that now you have a rivalry. You have really fundamental differences in terms of how it is that we are supposed to live in this world as a people. On the one hand, there's an idea that we should be who we are, integrate, have beautiful interface, engage, interact, and so on and so forth. And then you have another where it's no, we keep to ourselves, we do our thing, we use and engage with the world as necessary, but we are not actually part of it. Not that's for sure not. Right? Which I will show you that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually quite interested in. Right? So Yosef is a danger because he's got charisma. And you know how dangerous charisma could be. And everybody sees it in him. Look, remember, if Yosef was having these dreams and he was a bore and, a downer, and nobody wanted to spend time with him, and he had no charm, he would be much less threatening. The problem was that he was not a bore. He had tremendous amount of charm, and everybody wanted to spend time with him, especially when he was 17. You know these people, right? So this is who he was. The interesting thing is that the one who wanted to spend the most time with him was who? Dad. And that's going to come in very important. It's a very important thing. It's going to come in a little bit, right? And I'm conscious of time, but there's one thing I want to show you. So what do the boys do in order to get him? There's only one thing that they can use in order to get him. See, because Yosef is so interested in the world and so interested in becoming part of it and so sensitive to how it is that he is seen, he can be misread to be not so serious about the things that matter. Right? Imagine if you're really focusing so much on how things look and how you interact. How many pages of Gemara have you really learned, Joe? I don't see you spending a lot of time in Bet Midrash. You're kind of like, cutting corners. We don't care about those things. As long as we know what's going on, as long as we know what the halakha is, what does Torah say? That's the only thing that's important. That is the only thing that's important. It's the only thing that God cares about. So look what Rashi says over here. They're beautiful, beautiful. And it's definitely a midrashic read, which to the point that Rashi has to say, En mikra Yosef midei pshuto. But nonetheless, look what he says. It says, Yosef had to go and find the brothers, right? So he's going off to find the brothers. He finds a guy. He says, have you seen my brothers? He says, they've left. I heard them saying, Nelecha dotaina. We're going to Dotan. Rashi says, and of course, everything that Rashi says in this capacity, it's from a Midrash HaChamim. It says, Levakesh lecha nichle datot sheyemitucha bahem. This to me is one of the most brilliant glosses. Where have they gone to Dotan? Dotan is a play on words, says Rashi. Dotan is from Lashon Dat, which is essentially religious practice, right? Or uniform practice. It's not necessarily religious. It's dogmas. It's mores, right? Like you see in the Megillah. Yeah, what's dateh hamelech? It's not religious. There are terms, rules, right? We're going to look at the rule book. And we're going to kill you by the rules. And that's what he's saying. That's what their tactic was. We're going to get you by the rules. We're going to open the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to find out what you're crossing. And we're going to get you because we're going to see it says it. It says it. You're not allowed to do that. And that's how we do it. That's fascinating, right? But that's what they do. That's their tactic because they can't play his game. So this is the pasuk that I wanted to show you in Zechariah. It's an amazing pasuk because Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying to the Navi, he says, you know, there's going to be a day that comes. V'nilvu goyim rabim el Adonai bayomahu. Nations will stream to God on that day. V'hayu li le'am. And they will be for me a nation. Well, we haven't heard that. I mean, that's us. Like, what do you mean? Oh no, there'll be a nation. And I'll be with you. Right? I'll rest among you, but they will be. And through that, v'yadat ki Adonai sevaot shelachani yadayich. Right? So Zechariah is saying, that's fascinating. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not interested in the annihilation of the Goyim. To the contrary. He's interested in having his Goyim. I mean, he made them. Why wouldn't he want them? Not to mention, the very famous line of Beti bet tefillah, ikare bet tefillah lechol ha'amim. Right? My house will also be called a house of prayer for all nations. God's interested in the nations. He likes the nations. He made them. He has a special thing going with us, yeah, but at the end of the day, very important. Okay, so all of this, you can see where the thrust is moving. If we're blessing our kids to be like Ephraim and Manasseh, and we're taking the risk of blessing our kids to be after people who are no longer, right? Clearly, what we're looking at is the philosophy of Yosef. We choose him. We could very easily do what we do with the girls and say, we should maybe be like Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, but we don't say that. We say Ephraim and Manasseh. Why not? The girls, we don't have any other girls. So we say, Sarat of Karahel Leah, right? But we like to borrow Yaakov's thing when we talk to the boys. And we bless it should be like Yosef. And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does to try and hold them and save them and keep them. Unfortunately, they choose otherwise, but nonetheless, it's a big thing. The longest narrative. His way. Right, and his accusation towards his brothers is what? You're a bunch of spies. You don't live in this world faithfully. You take from this world what you want, use its services as you have, and you keep to yourselves. You're not faithful people. You're spies. That wasn't just some tactic. He meant that. He meant it. Look what you did to Shechem. Do spies not do that? I mean, is that not exactly what a spy does? They use the information and pretend that they're part of the people in order to be able to destroy them? Of course. That's what spies do. So there's another thing that I want to show you with regards to this, right? Because this never goes away. It never, ever goes away. Till this day, it has not gone away in our people, this rivalry, right? So when finally he says, look, I'm Yosef after the entire thing, and Lord, they couldn't answer him and all of that, you think, you make a mistake sometimes, not you, people make a mistake sometimes, and they read the story thinking that Yosef finally won, and they realize, and they capitulate, and there was no capitulation, zero capitulation. They never give themselves over to what Yosef thought and how he thought. And it's brilliantly presented when Yosef realizes, okay, I have to introduce the family to Paro. And how am I supposed to introduce them to Paro? Because he's going to think they're like me, but they're not like me, right? And Paro is totally expecting a whole Yosef family to come in. I mean, if this is what one of them is like, imagine what an entire family is like, right? So Yosef realizes that this is a bit of a sticky issue. And so what he does is he really tries to control this. And of course, he didn't know about codependency and the ability to control other people and so on and so forth. But you cannot control other people. And Yosef really tried, right? It blew up. terribly in his face, but he really tries to control this entire thing where he's going to hopefully just get through introducing them to Paro, right, without a problem. So he has to prep them for this, right? So Vayomer Yosef Elehav, Yosef says to his brothers and Bet Aviv, I'm going to go and tell Paro you're here, okay? He's probably going to want to see you. And of course, Yosef knows the protocol because he's the viceroy. He knows exactly what it's going to happen. He knows exactly what the protocol is, right? So he says, look, he goes, I'm gonna say to him, Ahayu bet avi asher be'eretz Kenan ba'u elai. I'm going to say that you came from me, okay? Just because he's going to want you to be invested with the country like I am. So I'm going to say that you've come from me. Now then there's like, this is an italics, aside in the Torah. So I'm saying, and the people were Ro'etzon, right? It's important to know that Yosef's brothers were Ro'etzon, right? It's the off-stage voice that comes in. Now, then back to Yosef. Now, when Paro calls you, he is going to ask you, Ma ma'asechem. He's going to ask you what you do. Of course, the reason why he's going to ask you what you do is because he's going to know if what you do can help him. All right, but that will happen. That will be what he asks. This is what you say, okay? Listen carefully. Va'amartem anshe mikneh. Can you say anshe mikneh? Anshe mikneh hayu abadecha. Do not say that you are ro'etzon. Right, as we know already in the story, To'avat Mitzrayim, right? It's like the most abominable thing to be a shepherd. You're ranchers, okay? You have flocks. So does he. He also has flock. You're on Shemikneh. Say that you are on Shemikneh. Say Min'urenu v'an'ata. You've always been on Shemikneh, right? Gam anachnu, gam avotenu. And this will then suggest, right, that you should sit in Goshen because it's the best place for it. Right? Ba'avur, if you say that, you'll end up being offered Eretz Goshen. Ba'avur tishavu be'eretz Goshen. Notice also that he says tishavu. What is tishavu? It's not just sit, right? A toshav is what? A citizen, right? So that you can become citizens of Goshen. Right? It's important that Paro thinks that you are citizens, right? That you're coming to be part of the Egypt thing. Like me, see me? I'm Mr. Egypt, right? This is what you guys need to be, okay? That's what he's saying. He tells him this, right? Okay. ויבוא יוסף ויגד לפרעה ויאמר אבי ואחי וצאנם כרם וכל אשר להם באו בארץ כנען והינם בארץ גושן. My father, my brothers, all that they've got, they've come to Egypt. They are right now in Goshen. Right? Which is, again, Yosef's suggestion that they should just be there. Don't say that you need to live there. It's all very delicate, right? So, okay. Now, this is the most telling line, right? Umikze ehav, right? He singles out 5 of them, right? Is he like, who are the best 5 that I could choose to put there? Mikze ehav. Lakah hamisha anashim vayatzigem livnei Paro. Vayatzigem, literally, the modern word for play in Hebrew is hatzaga, right? It's a presentation, right? He literally presents them to Paro, right? He's working this all very, very, very carefully. Vayatzigem livnei Paro. And right on cue, vayomer Paro elehav ma ma'asechem. And what do you do? Vayomer Paro ro'etzon avadecha. And say, what? Well, we're shepherds. Gam anachnu, gam avotenu, us, our fathers. And then they say again, now notice it says again, vayomiru el Paro, right? They don't shut up. They see that already he's heard this and he's like, and they keep talking. By the way, we want to sit in there as Goshen, right? They tell him, vayomiru, lagur ba'aretz banu. Don't think we're coming to stay here. We're not toshavim. We're just passing through. We're strangers. We're just living here for a time. Lagur ba'aretz banu. Can we please go live in Eretz Goshen? So they make a point of saying, we're just passing through, and yes, we would like to live in Eretz Goshen. Paro does not answer them. He doesn't even talk to them anymore. he's, appalled, right? He doesn't even talk to them anymore. But so he, Vayomer Paro el Yosef. Paro turns to Yosef. He says, "Achecha avicha ve'achecha ba'u elecha." It's very clear to me that they, of course, indeed came for you. I mean, there's nothing here that's for me, So Eretz Mitzrayim fanechi. Look, Joe, you're the head of Egypt. I mean, you know that it's yours. Put them wherever it is that you want. Whatever's good. You can sit them in Eretz Goshen if you want. And by the way, im yadata v'yesh ba man shehayil, if there's anyone in the family that might work, that might help me, well, then make them ranchers over my flock. Maybe they can do that. How about that? I mean, this is it's a shanda. They refuse. They know what they're doing over here. They know exactly what they're doing over here. And he tried so hard, right? Not working. And that never goes away. Now, the interesting thing is that when it comes time to actually talk about our people, and we decide this is what we're going to say as a people, on Pesach, no less, right? When this is the time that we're talking about our narrative, whose narrative do we choose? Theirs, not Yosef's. That's what we say in Haggadah. How did they go down to Egypt? They were out of control. I mean, they had to do it. There was no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent them down there. It says, Vayagor Sham. And they lived there. They were strangers there. Yaakov did not go down to stay there. That wasn't their interest. Lagur Sham. They only went to pass through there, to live there. How do we know? It says, they said to Paro, Lagur ba'aretz banu. That's a direct quote from what we just saw. That's us. Why is that us? Right? So I understand I'm sensitive to time, and I'm sorry that I'm drawing on of it, but it's important to be able to understand this properly, right? And to close. So I'll close with this, and then you can look at the other things on your own, right? Yosef's way is, of course, our way. The problem is that the brothers' argument towards him was not just some superfluous, nonsensical argument. What they were saying was, no, we get what you want to do. It's also extremely dangerous. Look what happened to Dinah. And who knows what else is going to happen. That's why the Hachamim say that when he came to them, right, when they're sitting around and they put him in the pit, they say, Hine ba'ala halomot halazeba. I put it on the pages in Midrash Rabbi. Ba'ala halomot halazeba. You see the word Baal, and you know what that means, right? He's going to bring us all to the Baal, this guy. We're all going to end up worshiping Avodah Zarah because of him. And they're not wrong. Because Yerovam ben Nevat was from the tribe of Ephraim. He was very much a Yosef kind of guy. I mean, the only thing that it tells us about him when Ahiyah Shiloni gives him the Nebu'ah of God giving him 10 tribes, it only tells us one thing about him. He was wearing a new suit. Of course, it tells us that because the suit was ripped into 10 pieces, 12 pieces, and given to, but I mean, that's the most important detail. And Yerovam ben Nevat was indeed a very charismatic man. He got the entire people to follow him. I mean, all the other brothers actually went on his side at this point. And he never goes away. No matter what's going on throughout all the Nevi'im, it just keeps saying over and over again, Rak habamot lo saru. Rak habamot lo saru. That Yerovam ben Nevat was responsible for bringing into the people. So there are serious problems with Yosef's approach. As a matter of fact, Yosef's approach caused the whole of the nation of Yisrael to be lost. That's the reason why we're Jews. We're the only ones left. So there's something about Yehuda's approach that is very important. But here's what I'm going to say about it, and I'm saying it in short. And you can deal with it as you wish. And then if you want to do a second class, we can do a second class. I don't know. That's up to Sinna. But the idea is as follows. Yaakov, of course, saw that Yosef was right. And it was what Yaakov wanted. And Yaakov, if he had his way without the opposition, would have set up a situation in which everybody would have been prepared to live that way in the world. The problem is that in order to be able to live that way in the world, one must not only have nice interface. They can't just have the hardware. You need the software. And that's a big mistake that people make. You can't do it if you don't have the software. If you do not know who you are, if you do not understand what it means to be a member of Yisrael and to be in Berit with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and what Torah is for us, Yosef's way is the fast road to annihilation. That's why I think the Ramban Nachmani's Perush of Ben Zikunim is a beautiful one. Why Ben Zikunim? He makes a very good point. He says Ben Zikunim was not, Yaakov was old with almost all the kids. But Yosef was this Ben Zikunim in the sense that he says, Minhag Zekinim, right? The older parents they pick one kid to help them, to be with them all the time. And by being with the parent all the time, you learn things that you otherwise don't get. Yosef was a remarkable young man, not just because of his character, but think about who he was. He had the full love of both of his parents. He knew that he was completely loved by both of his parents. And not only that, and this is very important, he also knew that his parents loved each other and that he was the product of that relationship. Imagine what it is to grow up seeing that your father is not quite interested in your mother. I mean, this was the whole issue according to Hachamim with Reuven. And it's very much in the Pshat as well. Reuven's whole issue. You want to go? Rachel dies and you're going to Bilhah's bedroom? My mother, Leah, should still be snubbed? I mean, one thing when Rachel is around. Imagine the psychological development, right, that goes into that family dynamic. Yosef, none of that. He was loved. His parents were one. He was completely cherished and developed. And his father kept him around all the time. Now, as a result of that, Yosef, first of all, has a very strong self-esteem, and second of all, has a very, very robust sense of self. A very strong identity, which is the only way he survives in Egypt, by the way. I mean, there was no Chabad in Egypt. Right? So, I mean, the only way that he ends up surviving in Egypt is because he has a robust identity. And that's why there's a beautiful Midrash that says when his brothers came down to Egypt to look for him, they looked in every house of ill repute that they could find in Egypt, and they couldn't find him anywhere. Because where else is the kid going to be? I mean, guy's got looks to kill. He's 17 years old. I mean, arrogant. Where else is he going to be? Yeah. So Yosef had the goods to be able to live the way that he did. And he was tested. Yerovam, on the other hand, not so much. And others like him, not so much. So the Ben Zikunim is a very important part of who he is. So the Ramban says that's what Ben Zikunim is. And he points out that that's what he believes Onkelos is saying and so on. But that's a very important part of it. And in order for us to be able to talk about what we talk about, you have to be integrating and in the world and embracing and so on and so forth. Yes, absolutely. That is the right way to be. And I'll tell you another thing. You can't do it any other way. I'll tell you why in a minute, but you can't. But the only way to do it and really be able to survive and thrive is to be able to have a very strong sense of identity. The problem with doing it the other way is that it's not viable. You cannot isolate yourself from the world and be a thriving human being. We are social animals. And at the end of the day, we require that. Now, nowadays, it used to be once upon a time, people believed that they could build walls. There are no walls. You have to teach children how to swim because they're going to find water and they're going to go in. And they need to know how. And the only way to do that is to be able to instill proper identity into our children. There is no other way. So one could speak from now till doomsday about how important it is to be in the world and integrate and embrace and so on and so forth. But it's a bloodbath. Because what they're saying, what the brothers were saying, was absolutely correct. There's one thing when you got Yaakov Avinu, running things, and even that wouldn't work. So you have Yosef who runs, and he's the only one. That's why Yaakov felt so strongly about Ephraim and Menashe. He came to Egypt and he said, "You raise these kids here, and these are these fine young men that they've turned out to be. Ad boi elecha? I haven't even been part of it. Look how remarkable. You should bless the children of Israel to be like these boys. The boys, not the nations. Look how they've thrived in Egypt as genuine members of Yisrael. Unbelievable. That's my dream. That's what they should be able to be. Doesn't matter what they're wearing or what language they're speaking or what names they have. It's the soul. It's the identity. That's the important thing. Now, the real issue is, and this is, I did bring Harambam, and we're going to close with this, is that it is not carte blanche. It really isn't. It isn't, well, we got to go out into the world and do what we can. So that's it. Let the chips fall where they may, right? No. Rambam posek very clearly. One has to be extremely careful about how one integrates with the world. So he writes at the end, Derech briato shel adam liot nimshach b'de'otav u'b'ma'asav ha're'av v'haverav. We're social animals. The nature of a human being is to follow the way of his friends and the people with whom he associates. Right? I mean, he follows what his people do. You're Ukrainian, you're a Ukrainian Jew, you act like a Ukrainian. That's what it is. So we always have been, right? We're fiercely patriotic people, no matter what country we're living in. Therefore, a person really needs to choose one's friends wisely. Befriend righteous people. Befriend people who really do know who they are and live it. That's what a tzaddik is, right? It's not for nothing that we say Yosef a tzaddik. We don't call anybody else the tzaddik, right? You really should spend most of your time with genuine hachamim, if you can, right? Not just people who have smicha. He doesn't say rabbanim, right? Hachamim. You need to be with wise people, people who know, people who can teach, people who genuinely can answer. It's very important. So you can learn from their deeds. Notice he doesn't say so you can learn from their thought. So you can learn from their deeds. Because remember, in Hilchot Derot, a hacham is a person who knows how to live, right? A person who knows how to act in the world. That's what a hacham is. Keep away from the non-tzaddik people, right? The Rishayim, so you don't learn from their deeds. Because you can't help but learn from the deeds, Harambam is saying. You can't help it. It's the way that we are. You don't even realize it's happening when it's happening, and it happens. I mean, it happens to me when I go back to the States. People say, what happened to the way you talk? Look at what you did. Look at what you used to do that. I don't know. I live with British people. I'm supposed to tell you. It's funny, and people here, when I come back, like I've been there for 2 months or whatever, a few weeks, I come back like, whoa, what's with the American accent? Right? A person who walks with hachamim becomes wise, but a person who's always shepherding with the imbeciles, right? His end is just bad. Then he says, and also, right, forget about neighborhoods. If you're in a country, right, or in your place, a state, where the way of the people of that place in general is just not a good way. Leave that place. You have to leave that place and go to a place where there are tzaddikim that you can live with. Go there. Now, of all the countries that you could go to, and anywhere that you wanted to go and live, all of them were like that. And then he says, like now, right? And this was almost 900 years ago, right? So, or you just can't get there physically for whatever reason. Yeah. Yeshev badad v'idom, sit alone. That's a very severe ruling, right? I mean, how are social animals supposed to sit alone? And if it's such a situation in which they don't let you live alone, you got one of these, right? Well, what do? That's a problem. He says, if they don't leave you alone, no matter what, you're always pulled in with them. He says you've got to hold back. Whatever it is you can do, don't go with them. So this is not just, look, we've got to live in the world, let's live in the world. This is like, we've got to be profoundly discerning and constantly working on our ma'asim and our chokhmah and our capacity to be able to hold sidkut. It's extremely important. It's not enough to just say, well, I mean, my kids need to go to university. No, they do, you're right. You better set them up for that. And that's why the next halakha is, there's a mitzvah lidabek lahachamim, right? There's a mitzvah to cling to genuine hachamim. Because it's the way that we learn. Kedei lilmod, again, lilmod me'ma'asehim, to learn from their deeds. So it's not just about sitting and learning information. Information is wonderful, but how often do you experience in your life that you know something, but it's just not sitting here? It's not happening in the act. There's all this stuff that's going on up here, and very little is trickling down into here. It's why yoga is very important. You're going to think I'm nuts for saying that. No, I'm not kidding though, right? As an example. Why? Because it helps you bring your mind into your body. It helps you anchor. I'm not saying all of you have to go now and go do yoga. I'm just saying, I'm giving an example, right? It's a tactic. It's a way that helps integrate mind with body. Whatever it is that you need to do, right? Harambam's approach was practice, 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 practice. Daily, daily, daily practice. Do it so that you can actually be it. Right? So in Gandhi, right, from Harambam, says, be the change you want to be in the world. That's what he's saying. He's not saying you can talk about it all you want. They're going to talk the Yosef talk, but you got to walk the Yosef walk. You go to Egypt when you're 17 years old and be sold as a slave and then prisoner in jail and then made viceroy and hold yourself and raise your children as genuine members of Yisrael. Good luck. And be tested the way that he was. Okay, that's like once in every. That's why you bless your children. Yeah, it's a really good beracha. You want that beracha to be. So it's very important, yes, to learn. It is very important to learn. And it's one of the most important things we will ever do. And that's why I always believe that it is important to teach children the whole Torah. I mean, all 5 books, which is halakha, by the way. You have to teach. Anybody who doesn't do that is over halakha. It's over the mitzvot, right? But that's what needs to be done. Why? Because it belongs to them. It's their identity. It's who they are. It affects the whole way that they think about themselves, the world. It's very important. Those kinds of things are very important. But it is also important to be able to live in places, be connected to people who not only know this, but live it. And yes, it's very hard today. It is. We're in the state, like Harambam says, Kamos Manenu. It's like our day. I'll hold. There's one thing that we do have that Harambam did not have, and that is that we have Zoom. Because it's funny, but it's not. I mean that seriously. We create virtual communities. It's better than nothing. I remember the time when you were of one mind, or you thought you recognized certain realities, and you literally were among 3-4 people, and there was really no capacity to connect with anyone else, really, in any significant, sustained way. And the problem with that is there's no critical mass, and there's not enough energy. Virtual communities are really important, and they are stand-ins, at least. I mean, they're definitely better than nothing. And it's not a plug for the Chabura, although, I mean, I mean, it's like really, really is. It's in of itself, besides the information that it's teaching, the fact that it provides virtual community for people that are otherwise isolated in places is very important. But nonetheless, it's not just here. It's Masehim. And that's very hard. It's very hard, but it's very important. That's why it is extremely valuable to spend whatever time one can connected to Ma'asim, right? To Hachamim, whose Ma'asim are that. Yeah. Okay. So again, I apologize genuinely for taking further than any ever was expected for this class, but I'm sorry. I felt I just had to do that. So hopefully before Kippur you'll forgive me and not be called on this.
No.